So, hello and welcome to this Citizen Matters chat with one of our most experienced and eminent waste management experts in the country today, Swati Singh Sambyal. Swati is presently associated as the waste management specialist with UN Habitat India. She has worked in South Asia and the Global South on development issues concerning integrated waste management and the circular economy for over 11 years. She has contributed significantly to India's Waste Management Rules 2016, especially on solid plastic and e-waste management, and has been a part of several high-level committees constituted on waste management in the country. She has worked as the head of a program on waste management at Center for Science and Environment, New Delhi, for over 9 years. Swati is trained at Swedish EPA Stockholm and Norwegian EPA Oslo on environmental governance and planning, and is a graduate in energy and environmental engineering. So welcome again, Swati, to Citizen Matters.
Thank you so much, Sadrupa, for having me over. It's my pleasure. Yeah, to be here again.
Pleasure for us too. So, Swati, as you know, I want to take up and discuss with you today one of the most pressing and seemingly insurmountable problems in our cities, especially the larger cities, and one which comes at a huge cost to the health and well-being of the populations in these cities. I'm not even sure how aware or how conscious people are to it at a broader scale. So I'm talking of landfill or waste dump site fires and management of these garbage sites. Over the last 1 week, we have all seen terrifying images on our computer screens, on TV screens from the burning Bhalswa landfill in Delhi. And though it's not the first and sadly does not look likely to be the last either, this is probably the fourth incident, if I'm not mistaken, after the previous Ghazipur fires a few weeks back. And in fact, not just NCR, but dump site fires are reported with alarming regularity from across the country. Most recently, we've also had, terrible news and images from the Perangudi landfill in Chennai. So Swati, we are seeing this after years of talk around committees, requests for technology proposals, various rules for legacy waste management, uh, paper mandates of segregation, and talk of bioremediation, waste to energy plants. So it seems that we are forever discussing this issue and how to solve it, but yet we have nothing to show for any of these. So where do you think we are going wrong?
Thanks, Sadrupa, for putting such a pertinent question. And as you rightly mentioned, I mean, a lot of work at the back end has happened, be it the rules, be it the committee that have been said, be it the work on bioremediation, biomining, or all the legacy waste management that is happening around cities. And still, we sit in 2022 facing fires. I mean, sitting in Delhi, I think it's heartbreaking because I've worked very closely on the Delhi bylaws, and a lot of what was written was based on what we need to do and how do we act now. But clearly the action has not happened. If I talk about Delhi, I think we're simply not doing what we're supposed to do. If you really look at these sites, they've been a ticking time bomb since decades now. All the three landfill dump sites, be it Ghazipur, Bhalswa, and Okla, they have been in use since 1984, 1994, and 1996 respectively. And most of them are still receiving fresh incoming waste. So if you look at Ghazipur, about 2,500 or over 2,500 tons per day. If we talk about Bhalswa, about 2,200 tons per day. And if we talk about Okla, which is a much smaller site, about 1,500 tons per day respectively. And it's important to know that these sites are not landfill sites. They are dump sites. They are not sanitary sites, which means there's no lining, there are no access roads so that there is effective transportation, or there are particular cells where you dump waste, and those cells are lined so that the groundwater or the aquifers are not contaminated. So it's not just air pollution that we're talking about. We are talking about pollution at every level at these sites. So in a scenario like this, I think we're really doomed, because if we look at Delhi, we are generating over 11,500 tons per day of waste, and only 40% of this is getting processed. And we're not working towards closing the tap. We are just wiping with the mop, and mind that the floodgates are open. These fire incidents have not just happened this year, they have been happening past 5 years. It's just that the awareness is so
Absolutely.
much
Yes.
now that even if it not comes on news, and even if a passerby is passing across these garbage hills, they are taking videos and they're putting photos. And so a citizen awareness, I think, in today's time is more, and but this has been happening. So if you're talking about dump site remediation in Delhi, and I'm sorry, I'll stick to Delhi because
Of course,
this
yes.
is what we are hearing so much about.
Yes.
But at one end, we're talking remediation, and the anomaly of it, we're dumping over 55% of the waste in these sites as well, with no focus on remediation, minimization, or segregation. And the haphazard dumping of all types of waste at these sites means that, of course, there have been recurrent fires because, the unduly hot temperatures that we're facing. Every time, every year, the temperatures rise above 40 degrees. This becomes an ideal environment for methane generation. And in an anaerobic process at this temperature, the gas generation is maximized. Besides, when remediation is being done, what we are also doing is we are excavating pockets of those gas which is coming out. So basically, when you're opening up these dump sites, you're releasing more gas that is already being generated at such a high rate, and a high temperature that we are facing in our cities due to the heat wave. It just adds like a catalyst. And, that's why, so many incidents of enormous fires. What I hear is that the fire in Bhalswa has still not, the firefighters are still not successful in turning it off. And adding to it, the environmental damage, and consequently the damage caused to people and communities and informal sector, and a lot of mandis are placed around these sites. I think it's totally enormous. We're living in a time where I think 20, 30 years ago, when these sites were decided, they were almost 20, 30 kilometers away from the city. But today, the city very much has engulfed these sites. The city has reached these sites. So we're talking about malls facing these sites. We're talking about highways on these sites. We're talking about resident areas, that or localities that are around these sites. So I think the environmental damage and the social damage is enormous. And the leachate that is being generated from these sites, it's more than 20 years old. For some of the sites over 30 now, and it has already contaminated the groundwater. So clearly, I think we have to look at the collective damage that it has done, not only to air, which invisibly, even someone like me who's sitting 30 kilometers away from that site is breathing, but also water, and also the social cost of it. And if we measure all these costs together, I think it's an enormous damage. So that's why, this gargantuan task, it seems seemingly difficult, and it definitely needs careful deliberation and action. What I feel is that it's time to go back to the blackboard, to the basics of waste management, to address A to Z. What we're doing is we are talking about Z right now, and we're trying to address it, but we're missing all the other steps that need to come together to ensure that these incidents don't happen again. And this is the case with, of course, Delhi has some very specific reasons also. It has a high population density. We don't have any fourth or fifth site. And I personally, as an expert, wouldn't encourage that now that we go scouting for a fourth or a fifth or a sixth landfill. But, at one end, we are remediating these sites. And at one end, we're not also closing the tap. There's still incoming fresh waste going to these sites. So how will it happen? I think this will continue to happen and happen and happen. So about time that we act now and go back to the basics.
Right. So from what I hear you saying, and of course, this is already known, so there are two parts to this problem, right? One of the legacy waste and one of the fresh inflow of waste, right? So in terms, if I look at legacy waste to start with, what is it that, it seems that the solutions are known to the municipality, to the state, and to to the powers that be. So, what is it that has hampered the actual implementation of these measures on the ground? Because are we even close to achieving the targets for remediation that we had?
Well, so there was an NGT case that which asked all the MCDs of Delhi to remediate all the legacy waste that is there.
Right.
But again, it's going to take a lot of time. I mean, there have been several calculations, and with the incoming waste coming in, it also adds up to the problem. And
Right.
and to look at it that these are not sanitary sites, as I said, these are dumping sites. So
Mhm.
if we look into how much have been remediated, I think it's still not enough. If we look at the February 2022 figures, which I was reading, I think for Ghazipur, about 9.03 lakh tons, about Bhalswa, about 21 lakh tons. We're talking about Okla, about 11 lakh tons of remediation that has happened.
Right.
But if we really look at it, the timelines of it, I think it's going to take decades to remediate all the legacy waste that is there. So clearly, just depending upon dump site remediation and biomining operations, what's happening in these sites, it's
Mhm.
not enough, as I said before, till we close the tap. We're not closing the tap.
Right.
We're still
Right.
dumping waste. Still over 5,500 and more tons of waste is daily coming to these three sites. So in this scenario, you're only adding and adding up to the problem. You're trying to solve
Right.
it at one end, but you're creating a mountain at the other end. And by the time you would be finished with legacy site remediation, you'll have to face, the other sites. I mean, the mountain that you've created with the incoming waste. So
Mhm.
clearly, there's no balancing act here. Or not enough has been done, or not enough action has been looked into. As we all know, Delhi is very centralized around its actions on waste management. We are dependent on waste to energy plants, we're dependent on dump sites, but we're not looking at local efforts. We're not looking at decentralization of efforts, whatever how much effort is being put at a centralized scale. I feel had we put so much effort at the decentralized level, the job would have been done by now, or I think it would have had a much better result than what we see now. So clearly, I mean, there are a lot of factors that have added up to it.
Mhm.
And just biomining or just bioremediation is not the solution here. So clearly we have to close the taps at Rupa here,
Mhm.
which is the problem. We're not doing that.
Absolutely. So, in fact, you've led me to my next question, which was like, I think the waste management bylaws of 2018 were looked and, I mean, prescribed decentralization. There was a whole lot of emphasis on decentralized waste management. How do you see the current status of, let us say, in situ processing by bulk generators or resource recovery at the municipalities and ward levels?
Okay.
What is broken there?
Well, if I just look at the waste management bylaws, the solid waste management bylaws for Delhi,
Right. Hmm.
I think what has really not worked has been the lack of compliance and monitoring. First, let me start with the status of segregation. The solid waste bylaws, as they're called for Delhi, and as you mentioned, notified in 2018, they place the onus of waste segregation into wet, dry, and domestic hazardous waste directly on those who generate it, including households, including the bulk generators, including the commercial generators.
Hmm.
And violators are liable to pay a fine of about 200 and above. Now, if we closely look at the segregation of waste at source, it's just being implemented in just 32% or 94 out of the 294 wards of Delhi. Now, this is as per the economic survey of Delhi that was done in 2020, 2021. The actual numbers could be much less, but well, they still say that about 32% of the wards are segregated.
Hmm.
And this practice is mostly prevalent in New Delhi Municipal Council, which is your Lutyens Delhi, and Delhi Cant areas, where about 22 wards segregate waste. While in the remaining areas, which is your South Delhi or North Delhi or West East Delhi, only 72 out of 272 wards, which is about 26% in the remaining Delhi segregate waste. So clearly, what we have to understand in 2022 is that segregation is not optional. It has to be mandatory. And it's not, even if you feel that it's not mandatory by the bylaw, by the central rules, which is the Solid Waste Management Rules 2016, the onus of waste management or the onus of segregation is on the generator, be it an individual generator, which is your household, be it a bulk generator, be it institutions. They all have to mandatorily segregate and sort at source, which is not happening clearly.
Mhm.
And of course, there's enough awareness around it. Sitting in 2022, I can't say that people don't know about it. Everyone knows about it. But clearly, it has not trickled down to behavior change. So the transition from knowing about it to, it being conditioned in your behavior and actions has not happened. So clearly, I think the awareness around the bylaws have not happened in the right manner. Of course, there were hoardings that were put up, but putting hoardings is not enough. Some RWAs have taken, steps and actions, and of course, there we see the success rate is much higher, where people know that segregation is important and why it's important, but it hasn't happened across Delhi. So, what is stopping authorities from imposing fines and penalties to both household and commercial generators when the law says it? That if they are not complying, they're liable to pay fines. Secondly, coming to processing, as of February this year, the total capacity of processing municipal solid waste in Delhi has been around 5,550 tons per day, which is about 49% of what Delhi generates, about 11,500 tons per day of waste. So clearly, we are not even halfway there. Since 2016, we haven't made any war-footing effort to increase our processing capacity. I'm also a bit iffy about when we say 49% processing, because 80% of this processing is happening in waste to energy plants. It's not happening, say, a lot of effort is not put to ensure that this gets composted, or biogas generation or biomethanization is happening out of it. A lot of it is going for incineration. Again, a very unsustainable practice. So clearly, sustainable processing is not happening, even when we're sort of critiquing on processing. So about time, I feel that the corporations, the MCDs play an important role here to initiate this at a more decentralized scale, which is at RWA level, at community level. And I'm not sure what is stopping authorities to build such systems, because clearly there is an infrastructure. Sitting in Delhi, we're talking about over 1,500 dhalaus, which are the secondary transport centers, and it's a decent amount of land per ward that could be utilized to convert into processing centers. This was also the suggestion that was given as a part of the High Court constituted Committee on Waste Management, which led to the formulation of the Delhi bylaws. So, I clearly feel that as a city, where I've been living past 1 decade. This is also a city where a lot of environmental organizations are living, a lot of advocacy organizations are based out of here. So clearly, I think we all have to come together and work on a war footing mode to focus on decentralization and to ensure that only inerts or rejects go to dumping sites. But clearly, that is not happening right now. So Satrupa, that's like the overall picture of what's happening and stitching together for you that why it has led to what has happened.
No, that's interesting. And there is another thing that you said a while back, and it kind of stuck to me, is that at one level, we see a lot of citizen awareness, right? Like people who are driving past landfills are taking photos, posting it. At another, when we look at larger behavioral change and doing the things that matter, there has evidently not been enough effort. So do you think this is because the awareness is in silos, or that from awareness to implementation, there is more that needs to be done?
Yeah. You just answered it, Satrupa. From awareness to implementation, clearly a lot of effort has to be done. So one is, of course, you could do your rounds on advocacy, on roping in volunteer organizations, NGOs, community-based organizations to do rounds. You can put hoardings which everyone can read. Okay, there are fines, you have to segregate. It gets circulated even on RWA WhatsApp groups. Like in Delhi, we have WhatsApp groups in every RWA where you get all these messages. But clearly when it comes to action, so if I as a generator am not segregating, what happens? At that level, nothing is happening. If the collector who comes to my doorstep and collects the waste and is mixing it, well, at that step, I don't see any action happening. So clearly, a lot of loopholes here in compliance and monitoring, in putting penalties in place. And clearly, of course, just putting the stick not helps. I also feel that advocacy and awareness trickling down to behavior change, it has to be a continuous process. And what you said, it's been intermittent. Mostly, so after 2018, in 2019, when the bylaws were, they were out, of course, a lot of advocacy happened. But clearly it's dead. And right now also from time to time, say in 5 or 6 months, you again get those messages. If you don't segregate, you'll have to pay a fine. But then no action happens on the ground. Or everyone has a way to, get away with it, which should not happen. If it not happens in some best practice countries in the West, or including in some best practice cities in India, why should Delhi act in this way? So clearly, I feel here the authorities really need to ramp up the action on the ground. Also, look at more decentralization of powers. For instance, we talk about plastic bans. They have worked widely in a few states, in a few cities, because there have been more decentralization of powers. Just putting the onus on municipality will not work, because clearly when we talk about waste management, it's a huge stakeholder chain. It not just encompasses the corporation or the MCD or the state. It's everyone that is involved, right from generating to management to processing to end disposal. To someone also looking at compliance and monitoring. So clearly everyone has to come together here, and how do we stitch everyone is the challenge, which of course some smaller cities have addressed, but Delhi being a big city, a complicated city, now woven into 5 MCDs, but now like 3 MCDs. They've stitched 3 MCDs, and then there's Delhi, Cant, and NDMC. So clearly a lot of effort has to be put into it. And I remember there was once this meeting where Panchkani was presenting, and someone from a big city, I don't want to name, but they said, Panchkani is small, you're just 17 wards, you have achieved 100% segregation. And I remember the mayor of Panchkani just rose up and she said, well, I know I just have 17 wards and you're talking about over 200 wards and it's difficult, but why can't you look at your 17 wards and try to convert them into Panchkani? So clearly, big cities can look into hybridization of learning from smaller cities, rather than saying, well, these are smaller cities, so they can do it. We are bigger cities, we need more centralized action. But clearly you have all the funds. So if a city with a smaller fund and infrastructure bandwidth can do it, why can't you sitting on so much funds can't do it? Clearly that's not the answer. So
I know you just mentioned about how these cities have brought together the various stakeholders in the waste chain, and that is probably one of the key factors that they've been able to evolve effective policies. But if I could also ask you, are there other concrete lessons? I know you're a big champion and you've written in the past about cities like Panchkani and Bengola and Ambikapur. So are there a few other concrete takeaways that you would suggest? Why is it okay? I mean, why can't a Delhi or a Chennai do what a Panchkani or an Ambikapur is doing?
Well, I see a lot of work happening in the global south around this area, because clearly, for instance, countries in Africa or in Southeast Asia, all of us sort of grapple with the similar issue, the complexity of the changing waste stream, but still high population density, lack of land to dump waste, which is sort of pushing many countries to look at more innovative solutions and more decentralized solutions. So clearly in past decade, I think Rwanda has done a lot of good work around waste management, resource management, more around circular processes. We also look at Kenya, which has done a lot of work around, reducing the dependence on landfills and focusing on segregation, minimization, banning complex items like single-use plastics because clearly they don't know what to do and how to deal with it. And if we look at Southeast Asia, a lot of examples around Philippines, Singapore, countries that have really looked into minimization, segregation at a war footing effort. So that clearly is the key. You really have to address the white elephant here, which is waste generation. So clearly at one end, it is increasing. And at the other end, you're also looking at scarcity of resources or infrastructure or land to manage that waste. So, of course, it has led to a lot of frontier technologies that have played an important role or crucial role in minimizing waste, or looking into cooperative-led models that are supporting informal sector. So a lot of work is happening, I think, a lot around Southeast Asia and Global South. But I feel for India, we have umpty examples from within the country to learn from. Even if you look at every state and try to map what is the best practice happening around my state, clearly there'll be easily some 9, 10 good examples happening at a small city level, at a gram panchayat level, wherein we can learn from all those stories and put them into action for bigger cities. But I think that thing is not happening. I mean, clearly Swachh Sarvekshan or Smart Cities mission, these missions have really led to the aggregation of resources. But if we look at the aggregation of action, that really has not happened. So clearly, I think a lot of work has to be done around it, because cities are just happy in the models that they have set up. If you look at Delhi, clearly, I don't know what's stopping them from going decentralized, because they've got all the answers that they could get visibly, factually, in numbers, that your centralized systems are not working. They're clearly failing. And in 10 years or so, I mean, this city will become unlivable. I mean, I personally feel that I'll have to shift somewhere, because you are in a choked, breathless situation half of the year. In winters, due to the rise in pollution, in summers, due to these incidents, and you have a very small window where the skies are blue, the air is good. And it's not just me who's working in this environment sector and advocacy sector, but even a normal citizen who feels that, well, there's no point of living here. We also have to look at the rate of migration from these cities clearly, which we really aren't mapping. But I have seen in past 4 or 5 years, a lot of people around me, a lot of people I know have left the city only because of pollution, only because they felt it wasn't safe for their kids, or only because they felt it wasn't safe for their parents who were living with critical, issues to stay in the city. So all that sort of factors in because of the pollution that is happening in the city. And if not 100%, 20 or 30% of it is due to mismanagement of waste. So clearly, Satrupa, I mean, you can answer it from different ways, but yeah, I've tried to aggregate it together for you. Like, about time we learn from stories that have worked and be open to sort of reinvent the system. Because if not now, I think a lot of time has already been lost here. Yeah.
So one final question. As we saw, we have a lot of answers, but we are probably not applying those answers to make an impact on the ground. Do you, and both at the level of the authority as well as the level of the citizen, I think there is a huge change required in, what should I say, in our mindsets. Okay. And as you were just talking about reinventing the system. So do you see it as a lack of political will, a lack, and also does our culture and the way we've looked at waste all our lives, how do you see these things playing out?
So I think as a culture, the way we've looked at waste, municipal solid waste per se, is that it's someone else's job. So the moment it's in the dustbin, not my job, someone has to collect it. The moment it gets collected, well, it goes to a dhalao, not my job for the collector. Someone else has to get a truck and pick it up. So clearly, that's that's been the outlook for the waste that we generate. But clearly, we need to understand that it's our problem and it has to be managed in our own backyards. So I think we should start there from not in my backyard to in my backyard approach. As generators, clearly if we really try hard to segregate, as I said, it has to be treated as something which you generate, and hence it's your duty to segregate. And if you don't comply to it, well, pay fines, pay penalties. So clearly, municipal action then and their robustness on compliance and monitoring and enforcement comes into play there. Also on awareness. Secondly, I think what's important, and if you really track the cities where things have worked, one has looked at three areas where cities with best practices have fared well. One is there was a strong political will or a political push to ensure that this issue was addressed. Second, a strong administrative will. So if you have a really good commissioner, then things happen on the ground. And third, people's participation. Now, if these three factors come in together, well, you have a best practice city. If either of the twos are addressed, you still have a good practice city. And if none is addressed, well, you have Delhi. So clearly, I think, political, administrative, and people's will and stakeholders' will needs to come together for action to happen. And every best practice city, you talk about Panchgani, you talk about Ambikapur, you talk about the Indore model, you talk about the Alapura model, you talk about what's happening in Sikkim or the plastic ban in Himachal, something or the other or all the three components together have worked. So clearly, I mean, and with waste, as we discussed earlier also, Satrupa, that it's a complex value chain. You have formal players, you have informal players, you have generators, and different income groups, low, middle, and high. So clearly you have to reach out to everyone. And if you're missing even one aspect of the stakeholder value chain, it's leading to a problem. So I think collective action is the need of the hour, and social engineering and social innovation is the need of the hour. And the three wills that I talk about, political, administrative, and people's will, that has to come together to make the right change on the ground. Yeah.
Thank you, Swati. Thank you very much. That was quite an intense discussion, actually. And there's so many angles to this and so much. And it's sad that at one level, we know what's got to be done, but at another, we are not being able to do that. So I'm just hoping that, this will give people food for thought. This will push action in the right direction. And we'll have fewer Bhalswas and fewer Perangudis and fewer Gazipurs very soon.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Satrupa. Thank you so much.